Hello, my dear viewers. This amazing story will be very instructive for you. It is very interesting and beautiful. I wish you enjoy watching it.
Lily, you're out of your mind. Sarah looked at her daughter angrily with her hands at her sides. In one hand, by the way, was clutched the kitchen towel, and although she had never raised a hand on her girl in her life, but now she felt the urge not out of spite, purely for educational purposes, because her daughter had done something shamelessly wrong. 16-year-old Lily stood in front of her mother, arms folded across her chest, emotional defense posture, shoulder resting against the door jamb as if calm, like a true mistress of her life. But she looked out from under her long black bangs with a wolfish frown. And what her mother hated her with a frank challenge. "It's my body, and it's my business what I do with it," declared the teenager. "Your business," Sarah choked with indignation. "You have no conscience. You insulted me as a mother." The subject of heated family battles was in front of her eyes, on her lower lip, in her nose, and in her navel. Naked black crop top glistened with a cold shine of metal rings. Lily had gotten a piercing. She'd wanted one for a long time, but her mom had forbidden it, and now she'd gone ahead with it. And as if all her previous ugly behavior wasn't enough, "Take that crap off right now," Sarah squinted at him. "No," the girl's chin twitched. "Take it off, we'll put some ointment on it. You'll have scars." Sarah physically hurt to look at her daughter, who by nature was cute and beautiful. But the last couple of years, oh, it didn't help that. As the psychologist said, it was just teenage rebellion. "I wouldn't dream of it," Lily replied. "Ma, hands," she yelled when Sarah reached for her. "Not touch me. I'm an individual with my own desires. Hey!" The next instant, a slap sounded, and Lily, literally cornered, slapped her palm on her mother's hand. It didn't hurt in the least, but Sarah, aghast and froze. Had her own daughter just slapped her? Lily froze too, her eyes rounded, and her mouth too. "Mom, I didn't mean it. I'm so sorry. I just thought you might want to throw up now. Mom, I'm sorry." Sarah shook her head. She bit her lip and turned away. "Go away. I don't want to see you. Born and bred on your own head." "Mom." Lily's heart sank and she took a step forward. Selfish, just like her father, Sarah shouted, and Lily froze. Mom had touched Dad for nothing. He was the best person in the world for the girl, the most dear. And that's why she changed her mind about making up after all. And Lily knew from personal experience, a mother just needs time. She'd boil over, and then she'd be the first one to make peace. For example, we'll look into her room and call her to dinner to drink tea. Then the mother will say that she was wrong, that it is not pedagogical, but she just wants how best to take care of the future of the only daughter. Then Lily knew everything ahead of time. She herself would have to be told that she'd overreacted to promise not to do it again, and that would be it. Peace would be restored to the little family. But right now, Lily had decided to leave home. To her grandmother's, she of course is a weirdo, but it's better to stay with her, so to speak, in a safe place until the evening. Grandma lived across the street, so despite the fact that it was raining outside, and Lily did not put on a jacket, as she was in jeans, tops, and sneakers, rushed across the yard to her grandmother. "Hi, you, my wet little raven." Grandma shook her hands when her granddaughter appeared on her doorstep with traces of rain on her head and clothes. "Come in, my fool," called her grandmother affectionately, already shoving the girl into the bathroom and holding out a warm terry robe with pink kittens. In general, Lily spent so much time at May's house with her grandmother, coming to her from her father's side, that she lived in two houses, and there were always some of her things here. But the robe wasn't her choice. Tasteless for strong girls stuck in the noughties in terms of style. The robe, like so many other things, the earrings in this house were picked out by her grandmother, who had dreamed of raising her as a flower princess since she was a little girl. And this, according to Grandma, could not do without an abundance of pink color, good lace, dolls, and toy houses. And when Lily, as she herself recalled, was quite the hostess, she was all right with it. But then after she'd lost her father 4 years ago, killed in a car accident, everything had changed. Lily knew that for a fact. It was then that injustice was revealed to her. The true nature of this world. She would never again be willing to be the naive idiot who would settle for going through life with a smile and a belief in the best. Already standing in the bathroom, Lily heard voices. Granny had guests. The girl froze. Who is it? And then, recognizing, grinned and put on a robe over jeans and a top. Let there in the apartment only grandfather and the best grandmother's neighbor and friend Jack. She's the only one who doesn't walk around in a robe in front of strangers. Hello, said Lily. As she entered the hall, Granny shook her head at her, but said nothing about the unusual mix of clothes. She was pouring tea into cups. This time it was a set of red with white polka dots. Granny was a passionate fan of good dishes, and she, by the way, unlike many grandmothers, Lally knew this from the stories of the kids she knew, had no such thing as everyday dishes, and festive Granny lived every day to the fullest to the best of her ability. And for that, Lily respected her terribly. Good afternoon, young lady, Jack greeted her jokingly. If you don't mind judging us, I had the audacity to invite my muse to an art show, and she's breaking down. You watch your mouth, May said without rancor, and keep my granddaughter out of your intrigues. You should really go, Grandma, Lily said, climbing into a chair with her feet up. She sipped her tea with relish. Granny did a lot of things well, and tea too, green with chamomile and lime and lemon and honey. It's so invigorating that no energy drink can compare. Lily had only tried energy drink once on a dare with her classmates. She hated it. And then she got a headache. I won't waste my time with those who dare to call themselves artists. May expressed her opinion on modern art. Grandma, you said yourself that everything in history is changeable, and that's fine. Caught Lily with a smile. Oh, so much for teaching the youngsters on their own head. Wagged her finger at the older woman. Okay, I'll go. You won't leave me alone. I'm happy. Jack, rising, put his hand to his heart and bowed to his grandmother, then, catching her hand, kissed it. You are the sunshine of my life, trembling May. Oh, go now. His grandmother saw him off, and Tails grinned into her cup of tea. Old people were so nice. Grandma had been widowed before her granddaughter was born, and Lily, in a way, saw Jack as her grandfather. He'd also once been a colleague of Grandma's, also a historian. And on the basis of views on this science, they have not stopped for about 30 years of heated arguments. Lily, by the way, history, like many teenagers, could not tolerate, finding unbearably boring days, long names, surnames of kings ruling in dinosaur times. But there was something about history that she was curious about. Thanks to her grandmother, who managed to capture her granddaughter's attention one day. Just about the story Grandma told in a very entertaining way. Lily really listened. They finished their tea. At home at Grandma's was warm and cozy, and Lily began to drift off to sleep. Your book? May asked her, picking up a book with a picture of a young girl and a boy with red eyes and fangs. Yes, replied Lily. I forgot when I came to see you for a week. It doesn't look like Dracula, said Grandma, looking at the cover. A novel, or what, a lady's novel? Oh, you young people are drawn to the scary. Do not have enough nightmares in life. Granny, you don't understand. Lily laughed. It's so cool. The call of the night. The different nature of vampires. Eternal love. And I've read your Dracula. Boring. I don't know why it's become a cult. Dracula is really a bit overrated if we're not talking about the novel, but about the real prototype. That's right, nodded Lily. I've read about him. Vlad the Tsinch, right? A monster, a ruthless warrior, and a black sorcerer. And in fact, almost everything that is written about him, this one has no scientific confirmation. Oh, Grandma, don't be a nerd. It was the Middle Ages. There are beastly morals there. In those times, indeed, sometimes happened unthinkable, said Grandma thoughtfully. But did you know that there was a man who, rather than the sovereign of Transylvania, should be called the first vampire in history? No, I didn't. Lily wasn't really listening, ripping the tape off the book. So my granddaughter wants scary stories. Yeah. Do you know? Lily gave him a doubtful look. Only dibs on pirates, curses of pharaohs, and ghosts in Scottish castles. And about the beast from Givad? Grandma asked slyly. Yes, I can write a doctorate on it no worse than you, waved his hands girl. Well, since you are so clever and fearless, Let me tell you a story. Just a minute. Grandma went to the bookcase and took out from the top shelf a book in a burgundy leather binding for poems on gold. It's based on my doctorate, May said. Wrote it in '90. I thought the publishing house would accept it, but I published 100 copies for my own money and gave them to my colleagues. But I kept a copy for myself. Look, and she opened the book to the first page. Beautiful, Lily said to the portrait. It depicted a young woman embroidered with a golden dress. It was only a color photograph of the painting, but it felt like a noble woman looking into your very soul and looking unkindly. She was considered the first beauty in Hungary. Her name was Jenny. She was an early widow, and no one could force her to remarry. And there were plenty of hunters. She was the richest. She owned land to the horizon and beyond, castles and hundreds of men. Fiefdoms? Lily asked. Sort of, nodded Grandma. The Countess was considered a beauty. She liked to be like that, but old age and power frightened her. Oh, doesn't? Lily shrugged. Probably all old people would become young again if they could. Wouldn't they, Grandma? Probably. May fixed her glasses. The temptation would be great if it were possible, though you have to admit, every age has its advantages. And don't wrinkle your nose. Lily, my sweet, you'll understand when you reach my age. But back to our Countess. It was the turn of the 16th, 17th centuries, and the belief in witchcraft was still strong in Europe, although the Inquisition was already losing its power. So one day, Jenny decided to resort to witchcraft to stop time and preserve her beauty. She tried everything she could think of. It is said that an alchemist's expression from the findings could have been buried headfirst in all the gold and silver she had poured into them in the hope that they would help her. But it was all in vain. The years ran on, and already Jenny was noticing wrinkles and gray hair, and how much she hated the young girls. They were peasants and maids. They were nothing, rats, dirt under her feet, wearing rags. They couldn't eat foreign sweets. They were cold in winter. They didn't eat enough bread. But they had what Jenny so desperately craved, youth. Then one day, an old woman came to the Countess's castle, so nasty that good people were afraid to look at her. And she said she knew the right remedy for eternal beauty and youth. Was it something nightmarish, Grandma? Yes, asked Lily, and a chill ran down her spine. She felt similar emotions when she watched horror movies, but now she was talking about the real thing, even if it was centuries ago. Yes, May nodded. It happened to be the day the castle was visited by a nasty witch with toneless bells and bird skulls hanging from her belt. Jenny personally punished one of the maids. She accidentally pricked her mistress with a pin while helping her dress. So Jenny went out into the castle courtyard and ordered the witch to be chased away, because she didn't believe these crooks anymore. But she said she could prove her case. The Countess, it is important to note, beat the maid with whatever she could get her hands on. And now there were drops on her hands. And so the witchy old woman grabbed Jenny's hand, then spat on her hand and wiped away her saliva and scarlet marks. Then she whispered something like an incantation. See, she commanded, how the skin in that spot glowed, young and clean like a young girl's. The Countess looked at her hand in amazement and realized that it was so. But the old woman apparently warned the effect is not long. Tomorrow it will not come off, but you can prolong it and rejuvenate from top to toe and stay like that. Only it is necessary to take the juices of life from those who are prettier and younger. Since then, girls from 12 years old, daughters of peasants, artisans, vagrants began to disappear in the neighborhood. But some of them were found in such a way that it was clear that beasts were not capable of such a thing. It was the work of the evil power. And although the Countess had a lot of power, and she was able to shove her mouth for an age, but only rumors went and reached the rulers of neighboring lands, to whom this lady was like a bone in the throat. But everything she did not help her. Grandma, Lily asked excitedly, what happened next? Did they catch her? Yeah, she was crazy, just a maniac. It didn't help, May grinned. But the old woman apparently convinced her that she just needed more. More bats the color of a pomegranate, more pain and fear of innocent victims that would rain down and restore Mistress Jenny's youth. And so the Countess decided that the commoners, they are the third class, and turned her eyes to the daughters of her noble subjects. And those, of course, did not believe in silly rumors and willingly sent their children as pupils to such a noble lady, who promised to teach them good manners. And what happened to one and another girl? Something in time was like that. To the Countess, she only expressed her condolences. Yes, she hastily kept the poor things, who either died of fever or fell from the castle wall, supposedly by accident. But then delegates from the Council of Noble Men came to the castle. They came suddenly when the Countess was sure that her old woman's magic would not allow any enemies. And that was that. May held a spectacular pause. All historians still argue about whether Jenny died while walled up in one of the rooms of her castle or managed to escape. And those historians who are not a stranger to the existence of Atlantis, they say that Jenny still found the recipe for eternal youth. And now not Dracula, but she wanders the world in search of new victims of young beauties. At the last words, Grandma grabbed Lily by the armpits, tickled, and the girl laughed. "Oh, Grandma, stop it. Well, in fears you tell, but you listen to you, Grandma, and forget everything. I wish I could live with you." "Did you have a fight with your mom again?" May guessed shrewdly. Because of that, she touched her granddaughter's nose ring. "Yes," frowned Lily. "Mommy thinks I'm just a kid." "Formally, you're still a baby," grinned Grandma. "You'll forgive her, she means well. But why doesn't she care what I want?" "Most moms are like that," May sighed. "Mine told me to study to be a chef, not a historian. But I wanted to follow in my great-grandfather's footsteps." Great-grandfather came to the Soviet Union in the 20s from Hungary. "We have foreign ancestors." Lily's eyes widened. "It turns out so," May answered. "My great-grandfather worked as a historian all his life, and he was a museum curator. He went against his father's wishes too. His father thought he should go into commerce. That's the story." "Interesting. I didn't know that before." "You should have asked," grinned Grandma. "But those ancestors who were still there, in general from the nobility, came from a real aristocrats? No. Well, more like local nobility, but they were certainly not small men in their time. Well, it's evening. Mommy's probably got dinner ready and waiting for you to make up." Grandma patted her granddaughter on the head. "Go home and live amicably. We need to forgive Mom." Lily reluctantly went home. May cleaned up her book, hung up to dry, put on her robe, put on her slippers, then made herself some tea and picked up a paperback novel. You can dabble in tabloid literature, but I needed to rest, if only because it was still to convince her daughter-in-law that it would be good for them to combine their savings and buy a cottage. It will be where the whole family, albeit orphaned, to go for the summer. May hoped for Sarah's good judgment, and also May adored her granddaughter and even a little loved Sarah, but still did not understand her completely. Yes, there had been a dark tragedy in her life when she was young. She'd been held captive by a maniac, but did she have to carry that burden all her life? May felt it was time to let go of the past, especially when the man who served as a support and comfort to her daughter-in-law had passed away. That is, May's only son. Finally, it was late evening and the woman went to bed. Sarah also went to bed late that night. She and her daughter ate dinner, then silently, briefly apologized to each other. Outside the window, the rain drummed. Sarah lay down tightly, closing her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. And when it did come, it seemed to her that it was pure reality, gripping her in its nightmarish claws. It happened when she was only 19. It was the second half of the 90s, and Sarah's parents did for their daughter what they hoped would ensure her a brilliant future. They decided to send her to a language school in France for a few months. For a teenage girl just beginning to blossom, fascinated like many peers with everything foreign, it was a fantastic holiday. No, Sarah's parents were not millionaires, but her father, formerly an employee of a research institute, managed to enter the business in a difficult time, successfully rise in what he earned, not saved, and generously spent on the family. The language school was not anywhere but in Paris itself. True, there were strict rules and such a small discipline. Sarah used to cry a lot, and one day when the whole class was taken on an excursion to the Louvre, she rebelled. And when the teacher who was escorting the teenagers reprimanded her for something petty, Sarah just ran away. At first, she thought she was a cool girl and would make everyone worry. But then she realized that she was lost in the big city, and some drunk guys got attached. They started scaring her with a big dog that they threatened to let off the leash. And that's how Sarah found herself on the outskirts of Paris. Tearful, unable to imagine what they'd do to her when she got back to school. Surely they'll call her parents. Mom has a heart condition. She'll have a stroke. And Dad would be so disappointed since he worked so hard, he told herself, to pay for her trip. All in all, Sarah felt disgusted, but it was getting dark. The city around her looked increasingly gloomy. She began rummaging through the pockets of her jacket, looking for change for a bus ticket. Not a penny was on her. Sarah cried. What should I do? What is it, mademoiselle? What is it? Suddenly she heard a man's voice. A black car pulled up beside her and the driver, a man with a mustache and a plaid cap, looked at her with pity. It's okay, Sarah replied. Thank you. I'm not worth the trouble. Mademoiselle is a stranger? He asked, raising his eyebrows. Your French is beautiful, but I can hear the accent. And how can you not be worth the trouble if you're shivering with cold, and your nose is red with tears? What's the matter? Did someone hurt you? Well, I did. Sarah giggled, imagining that this uncle good-looking to punish the nasty tutor, Madame Sophie, who always criticized Sarah for her accent. On the other side of the street, some drunken men were laughing outside a coffee shop. Sarah shrugged her shoulders shakily. She realized she'd better get back to school before something happened. Yeah, before the police got involved. What if then her naughty girl got expelled altogether? How would she look her parents in the eye? Mademoiselle, where can I take you? Mademoiselle, where can I take you? A mustachioed man asked politely, opening the car door in front of her. Sarah gave him the address of the language school. The man smiled and said he was on his way. Sarah thanked him and got into his car, ignoring the bad feeling that told her to get away quickly. At least go to the other side of the street, and didn't care that there were drunken Frenchmen singing songs and dancing on the sidewalk. It just seemed to Sarah at some point that this generous and polite stranger was not what he seemed. But she didn't pay any attention to it. Sarah wandered back to the present, where she was a grown woman in her 40s, long ago risking leaving her terrors in the past. But on this night, the horrors were coming back, and memory insidiously planted other memories. Days in confinement. After the pain of the beatings, not crippling but maddening like hunger and thirst. Like the terror of loneliness when she would find herself in some pit, in the dark, for days, maybe months. After that, all the days in confinement merged for Sarah into a long fall, full of often repetitive, motley pictures of stories that made her doubt that she hadn't gone mad and that she was still. Sarah, a girl from Italy, with a loving dad and mom who had sent her, out of the best of intentions, to study in France. Her name was Lee now, and she hadn't cut her hair in a long time. It had grown down to her waist. She went barefoot. She wasn't allowed to wear pants or other 20th century clothing. Instead, she wore a long-sleeved undershirt and a cotton dress in the summer, woolen in the winter. If she was well behaved, she was allowed to keep the shawl of florals she went out to make with her hands. Now responding also to the name of Lee, as well as failing to lift her eyes if she was slandered by a bad wench or a stupid goat, she, with several other persons, lived in a room. There was one window without glass under the ceiling, which in the summer allowed to suffocate from the heat, but in winter and fall wind, cold, snow and rain penetrated through it. Who were these others? In all, about 24 of them changed. Sarah only dashed to find out at first, and then she realized, and yes, they all realized quickly, that there was no need to talk about the past. You can't call each other old names, you can cry, choked with tears on the shoulder of a friend in distress. But do not dare to remember your parents and relatives aloud. Don't you dare shout that you hate your jailers, and you will get out of here and they will be punished. There were some stubborn women during those 10 years, but every time the man with the mustache came for them, he said to call himself master, took the guilty ones away, and sometimes they never came back. Sometimes they came back after a month or two, quiet and silent, but no one needed more than 2 lessons to reform or disappear forever, as Sarah remembered in time. Time not spent in the room where they slept on straw mattresses, the slots spent in rooms that reminded Sarah of a museum. It must have once been not even a castle, but just a good stone house. The old miscellaneous wooden furniture had to be cleaned, the floors polished. And even if they were clean, they had to be cleaned again, scrubbed to a shine. And then there was the vegetable garden. On it girls, and then young girls, worked strictly at night. Those who behaved well a couple of times a month were were allowed to go out and sit on the porch to watch the sun set behind the horizon. They were also happily allowed to drink a month of steamed milk on this marvelous evening. They were not allowed to look after the animals, by the way. In the hours when the captives were not busy with hard labor and sleep, they left in a hurry the liquid chowder, which never contained meat. They were forced to memorize strange poems that spoke of demon witches, the hardships of peasant life, and how important it was to understand your place, and that you were no one's lost wench. They were also sometimes forced to drink tea, a herbaceous brew that seemed to have some kind of nasty fat added to it. It made them sick and gave them stomach aches and headaches. It also made them sleep for a long time. When they woke up, they felt like they'd been beaten up. They couldn't remember much about yesterday. However, the latter was usual. Days, weeks, months, years for Sarah, and as she supposed, silently for others, easily woven into some semblance of a small eternity. "How old are you?" Sarah was once asked by her prisoner neighbor. "I'm 14. "I don't know," Sarah replied. "See, it's getting dark. I'm 14 and I'm just starting to live." The neighbor stubbornly continued to speak. "My name is not Mara, it's Mary. My mom and dad live in London. We came to Toulouse for a vacation." Toulouse. Sarah stood up. She was horrified that she dared to speak on a taboo subject, and delighted that she suddenly realized where she was looking for me. "My dad's a millionaire." Mary grinned grimly. "He's been running the place into the ground. He'll take the head of the local police by the throat and won't let go until I'm found." "Shut up." Sarah clasped her hands over her ears, but her heart was pumping in time with the desperate thoughts of hope, seek, rescue, find. "No," Sarah screamed. "We can't. We must be submissive. I am a slave. I am inferior. I must work to repay the bread given to me. No hard work, no honor." Sarah wept quietly. She was so afraid. She was afraid that the one they called master would give her to that terrible lady. Yes, during these years, at times during these years, a guest had appeared in the house. None of the captives ever saw her face. She always wore a velvet mask, like at a carnival in Venice. She also wore gold and jewelry and smelled of perfume. When she appeared, the prisoners were lined up in front of her, made to recite poetry. And if they strayed from the rhythm, they were beaten. Sometimes the lady would grab one of the girls by the chin or hair and look into her face and say that she was very beautiful. "Would you like to leave here and be my maid? Would you like to be my maid? Ask that strange lady. I won't hurt you. If you obey me, you'll sleep on a feather pyramid and eat chocolate and honey. Do you want some?" If it pleased the lady, the poor prisoner could answer, cautiously, squinting at the gentleman who was watching this strange visit. "Call me Jenny, child." The woman grinned then, and then the girl of her choice would soon disappear. Sarah had always feared that the lady would choose her, but she didn't. Only by looking into her eyes with her own. They were gray, but speckled with yellow. And the lady also said that Sarah was special, but the time had not yet come. Only submission and labor. Dirty wenches have no right to live and breathe. We don't deserve the beauty and youth we wear like a stolen mask, but the time will come and we will take back what is not ours and be punished. And Sarah continued to mutter, "Shut up." Even in the twilight, you could see the eyes of a teenage girl named Mary sparkling. "You've been brainwashed, I see, but that's not gonna work on me." Sarah was killed by a large shiver. Her last roommate had disappeared 2 years ago, and she wasn't happy about the new girl. It seemed like she was sure to cause trouble. "Do you hear that?" Mary pointed her finger at the window with her head tilted back. "That's the wrong psycho." Sarah bit her lip and listened. Yes, there was talking. There was the word police in French. And then Sarah thought the air in the room ran out because she suddenly distinguished another voice painfully familiar. Papa dropped, and from our naughty lips a forgotten word. Sarah screamed and cried. The voices upstairs were suddenly silent. "Did you hear?" Someone asked. "It's coming from downstairs. It's down in the basement." Stomping on the stairs, the doors being broken down. 2 men flew into the room with the policeman. One of them threw himself at Mary, clasping her in a hug. The other froze in front of the one he remembered as a teenage girl. And now he saw a 23-year-old girl. Sarah whispered to him. Cautiously, he stepped toward her. "Dad," she breathed out and passed out. And then there were long weeks in the hospital, endless conversations with police detectives. Journalists wanted to get to the slave who had been rescued from 10 years of captivity, but the authorities wouldn't let them in. Sarah's parents all these years did not lose hope, looking for their daughter. They wrote official requests, demanded, begged for help. And now Sarah's father once again decided to personally go to the highest police department in Paris to demand to work normally on the case of his daughter's disappearance 10 years ago. He sympathized with them and said there were no leads, except for a random car she got into one day, but the father refused to believe it. He said he knew in his heart the girl was alive. "I can't leave it like this. Do you understand?" He told the officer. "My wife, Sarah's mom, she couldn't wait. My heart couldn't take it, and I can't leave it like this in her memory. I'm outside your door with the homeless, but I won't set foot in it. Unless you tell me you're working, Sarah can't be dead. You have to save her." The officer pitifully suggested we see a psychiatrist, and then he got the call, and his face changed. He jumped up and ran out and brought the chief. The supervisor took off his uniform hat, shook Sarah's father's hand, and said they had just been contacted from Toulouse. He said they had found a man they suspected of human trafficking, and he seemed to have been tried for kidnapping girls over 20 years ago. And he seems to be similar to the man that Sarah was accidentally seen with on the street 10 years ago. The drunken guest of a restaurant saw the girl getting into a car, but they didn't pay attention to it. They thought he was her relative. Sarah's father urgently flew to Toulouse. He was met there by the father of another girl who had disappeared just a week before. He introduced himself as James, expressed sympathy, and complained about the sluggishness of the case. And then, well, the guy who was suspected of the most nightmarish, he passed away, just pulled out a gun and threatened the officers. And they, of course, got defensive. And now the representatives of the law were going to visit his country house, and there they found a basement in Nice's. It took Sarah a long time to get used to the fact that she had been rescued. The first night she saw the sun setting outside the windows of the hospital room, she burst into tears. After all, this should be her evening, when she would be allowed by her master for good behavior to sit on the porch, watch the sunset, and drink milk. And now that was not going to happen. The nurse was clear, brought the poor thing some warm milk and some chocolate chip cookies. In general, Sarah was treated very well in the hospital, but it was still unbearably difficult for her. "Your daughter has kept her sanity," the psychologist told Lily's father, "but I'm afraid the mental trauma will last a lifetime. My advice to you, take her home where she was once safe and sound." That's what he did. The police were stubborn, though. They said they were in the middle of an investigation, that they were looking into where that horrible guy was selling people. They need to find out what kind of powerful patrons he had. And they sure as hell did, considering the 1 million francs they found in his home safe. But Sarah's father insisted on taking his daughter away as soon as possible. Probably could have turned out very badly in terms of media attention. But since everything happened in distant France, journalists, of course, could not get to Sarah. And eventually the little family managed to fight them off. Sarah's father decided that it was better to sell the apartment and move to another city to finally break with the past. Now it was possible to start, in fact, with a clean slate. But life was hard. After all, Sarah's father had to work to feed himself and his daughter, to look after his daughter, to help her get back to normal life. Sarah was afraid to go out on the street, frightened of cars. She could barely bring herself to socialize with the people around her. At night, she woke up with nightmares. Doctors said poor nutrition, lack of sunshine, chronic stress. It all nearly crippled her. But slowly, she started to come back to herself. That is, starting to live normally, and so many worries Sarah had. She had to get a school education. Her father wanted her to go to university, but she refused. She said she was sure she wouldn't pass the program and didn't see the point at all. Sarah learned to be a seamstress and was quite happy with it. It turned out she was a master at it. As the years went by, Sarah was already 30 years old, and from the outside it could seem that the worst things were in the past. And only if someone communicated with her longer, people could notice how sometimes she goes into herself, becomes aloof. But it turned out that the blows of fate were not over for Sarah. She lost her father, taken away by cancer, and the last thing he asked Sarah to arrange a personal life, because he was afraid to leave his girl alone. Sarah listened and accepted one man's advances. It was not a random man. Tony was the son of a co-worker of Sarah's father's with whom they worked together, designing equipment for the food industry. There was family life, years of happiness and peace, with many relatives and old acquaintances. Sarah's father, by the way, cut ties back then. He didn't like the way they spoke of his daughter returning from captivity. Someone even advised not to torture the young man and give his daughter to a boarding school for the mentally ill. As for her new family, Sarah, yes, she had to tell her husband and mother-in-law a little about what had happened to her. In general terms, she didn't want them to find out one day through some tin hands. Husband reacted normally in the sense of horrified, but then regretted and did not disturb her soul with questions. Mother-in-law also did not consider for the gloomy past daughter-in-law defective. However, not in everything Sarah got along with her mother-in-law. It was an ordinary story. She thought probably there are few families in the world where daughter-in-law and mother-in-law get along. And Sarah was also uncomfortable with what her mother-in-law was doing history. After the captivity, she had everything historical from movies to paintings, and even porcelain shepherdesses caused disgust and pushed her to what could be called a panic attack. And when her daughter was born, Sarah took vows from her husband and mother-in-law that they would never tell her what had happened and would not soil her life with such a nightmarish past. The next morning, Sarah got up completely shattered. "How's school going?" she asked her daughter at breakfast. "What else, Mom?" Lily rolled her eyes. "It's Sunday. Oh, give me a break. With this school for sure already, everything there is normal." "Okay." Pressing her lips, Sarah concentrated sawing pancakes into 4 parts. It somehow calmed down. "How's Grandma?" "She's the best." Lily smiled. "Flirting with Jack. Why don't they get married?" "Don't be ridiculous." Sarah knew she shouldn't take it out on her daughter when it wasn't even her fault, but she couldn't help herself. "Why? He's a nice old man. He has a son, by the way. How's he like a mom to you?" "What do you mean?" "I don't get it, Sarah." "Well, he seems like a nice guy." "He is." "Don't talk nonsense." Sarah noisily got up from the table and took her plate to the sink. "Well, Mom, you're not old yet." "You're not old yet. Why don't you get your own life together? I'll go to university after school. I'll have my own life. And you live like a recluse." "Stop it, Mom." Lily's confused. "I'm sorry, but it's just that even Grandma has drive at her age. She says she's writing a new book about ancient Egypt. By the way, she showed me this really cool book yesterday. She was writing her doctoral thesis on the same subject about a medieval maniac. Her name was Jenny, and she tortured her maids to get eternal youth." You, Sarah, turned around and looked at her daughter with unseeing eyes. It seemed to her that she was simultaneously floating in weightlessness and falling to the deep bottom. Her legs became absorbent cotton. It was as if something clicked in her head and corroded gears spun. Her daughter's words evoked strange associations, as if the back of her head was burning with the chilling horror of the past, from which Sarah had tried so hard to escape. "Shut up, you fool," she shouted at her daughter. Then she threw a dish towel at the wall. "I'm so sick of you and your crazy grandmother." "Mom." Lily stared at the shards in shock. "Mom, are you crazy enough to be Mother of the Year? You're telling me to calm down. You're just a loser. You walk around like a gray mouse. You couldn't even finish college. You have no friends, and you're telling other people how to live their lives." Lily dashed out of the kitchen and into the hallway to put on her ballet flats. She ran out onto the landing and then walked down the stairs because she was fed up. "Grandma." Sniffing her nose, the girl sat on the bench and talked on the phone. "Got a minute?" About the fact that in their city there is a school of etiquette called Melody, founded about 20 years ago by the wife of a new Italian, and in which sometimes teach foreign experts of good manners. Lily knew this well, because for 2 years now her grandmother had been stubbornly trying to get her to go there. You were a girl, she'd throw up her hands. When she found out about her granddaughter's latest mischief, for example, that she and the boys ran to an abandoned quarry with the forces of nature, turned into a lake, where they swam and dived deep to the bottom on a dare, or that Lily had joined a sports club to learn Aikido. For a woman's destiny to be a good woman, to have all the doors open to you in society, it's important to have good manners and to act like, well, You know what I mean? No, Grandma, I don't. The granddaughter stubbornly rolled her eyes. We live in the 21st century, and I'm not going to get a debutante ball. I'm not going to look for a rich husband who needs a wife. Jewelry and charm, what an idiot. In addition to the couch dog, Mom didn't approve of the etiquette school idea either, but for a different reason. She thought it was a waste of money. Mom would just freak out, Lily thought, when Grandma started talking about how nice the costume balls at this school were. But now Lily had a drastic change of heart and told her grandmother that she wanted to go to this school of etiquette. Lily did it because she knew her mother would be furious. She wanted to go against her. Grandma was so excited, she bought her a cake for tea. And then when she enrolled her granddaughter in this school, she gave her a lot of pocket money and more money for buttons. Because it's no good going there like a goth in black. Don't be mad at your mom, Grandma said. It's not easy for her. I understand that she can't get over Dad, sighed Lolly. But we have to move on. It's not just that, May sighed. Your mom, oh, I shouldn't say this, but you're a big girl. You have a right to know. Maybe then you'll forgive her somewhere and realize that your mom is still a good person for living it all after that. What are you talking about, Grandma? Lily put the cup of tea down. What happened to Mom? And May told her granddaughter everything she knew about the nightmarish story of Sarah's kidnapping and 10-year captivity. Lily listened without interrupting, only her expression was changing. Mom, she exhaled. I can't believe it. But why? Did Dad know? Why didn't they tell me? It's not fair. You can't tell a child that. May shook her head. And now it hurts. Not your father, not me. She never told me what they did to her there. Some things are better left unsaid. You know what they say. Remember the past frantically. Too often the newborn frantically appears. They were both silent for a few minutes. Let me make some fresh tea. How are your lessons in manners? May decided to change the subject. You said you were making progress with the waltz, didn't you? Yeah, I'm not stomping on my partner's feet anymore. Lily grinned, but she wasn't having fun. It seemed that now she wouldn't be able to stop thinking about what had happened to her mom. A nightmare. She was just a girl. It's a good thing that Creep is dead, Lily thought. And she also believed that all those who were involved in this nightmare have already gotten what they deserve from the French authorities. Grandma, I forgot to tell you. We're having a costume party because some Angelique is coming. They say she's French or Hungarian, and she's gonna teach us table labels and stuff. Grandma, maybe I shouldn't go. Lily lowered her head. I don't want to be laughed at, and I don't want to embarrass you. I'm not at ease there. The little girl waved her hands, but May didn't want to listen. On the contrary, she got very excited and said that it was just great and should definitely go there. And then she asked what the theme of the evening would be. Between the 16th and 18th centuries, Lily answered, the girls in my group will be making peasant costumes. The boys want to be knights. No surprise, right? Christians. Grandma smiled and leafed vigorously through her notebook. No, my granddaughter will not be a peasant. What are you going to call Grandma? Grandma? I have a girlfriend, May answered. May. She's been a costume designer at the theater all her life. She'll help us. You'll be the most beautiful and not a peasant, but a noble lady. It's interesting, Lily thought. In general, went to etiquette courses one guy, the son of a local businessman. Cheerful guy, but went not because he wanted to, and his mother directed. She thought it would make him more serious. His name was Joe, and he was 17 years old. Lily liked him, and she blushed like a poppy every time she was paired with him for dance lessons. And she suddenly thought she'd probably be shocked if she showed up for the evening, all dressed up, wearing black to class as usual. Yes, Lily was stubborn and never bought herself clothes that were different from what she was used to. May, on the other hand, had already managed to get the support of her acquaintance from the theater and now revealed to her granddaughter the very books she had already shown her. What would you say if you had a dress like this? She asked, pointing to the portrait of Jenny. Cool, Lily's eyes widened. Very cool. She was an idiot, but it's cool. It was the peak of Hungarian court fashion of the period. May nodded. See, this sewing gives away the borrowing from French fashion, typical of the royal court, and the lace was Venetian. Did your grandmother have Venetian lace? Lily raised an eyebrow. The bowels of May's apartment were full of trinkets and antiques that she and her grandfather had collected together. There was so much in it that Lily wouldn't be surprised if a Firebird feather was found here as well. No, May sighed, but we'll figure something out. Sarah was going through things. She'd been planning a big cleaning for a long time, but she'd only gotten around to it now. She'd already sorted out the hall closet and everything she could in the kitchen. And the cleanliness, the orderliness, the neatness, it all had a calming effect on her. And now she was going through the contents of the bedroom closet and thinking well under it all. Sarah thought back to the last conversation, that is, the quarrel with her daughter. It had been very hurtful, but she recognized it. Lily was right about a lot of things. She really is a weak loser. She'd lost when she let the past, from which she'd only essentially escaped, willed by a miracle of good fortune to continue to rule her life. She had a loving father, and she could have built her life differently. She could have gone to college, found a hobby, made friends, and lived every day, breathing with a full chest, looking at the world with wide open eyes and without fear, with a sense of gratitude for being alive, unlike so many girls who had suffered a different fate. So why didn't she do all this? And is it possible for her to change anything now? Sarah, by the way, already knew that her daughter was attending etiquette school. Her father-in-law had blabbed it to her. But Sarah pretended in front of her daughter that she still didn't know anything. She thought that Lily, if she wanted to, would tell herself. But yesterday, her mother-in-law shared the news. Lily has a big event coming up. She's going to a costume party, and there's going to be a boy she likes. That last bit was news to Sarah that she hadn't heard from her daughter. And suddenly she thought maybe the time for change was right in front of her. And just as they say, reach out your hand. And Sarah had a plan. She would go to this party. The parents of the students were invited. Naturally, no one was expecting them, and Sarah was fine with that. Just come, stand, sit, watch her daughter from afar. It's a normal thing for a parent to do if you care about your child's life and hobbies, right? And Sarah understood. Yes, for the sake of it, she would transcend herself, break herself, and cancel the fears that had haunted her for years. That's enough. The past is far away, and this is just a costume night where everyone will dance, eating cake and talking about nonsense. Sarah set aside the piles of stuff, then sorted through it and pulled the shoulder pads off the rack with a navy-colored dress, bottoms, and silk. Bought it because her husband said it looked great on her. Had never worn it yet. Didn't have time. And then when he was gone, I wasn't in the mood, but maybe it's time. Sarah put the outfit on her body and looked at herself in the mirror thoughtfully. It suited her. How strange to realize this about herself, that she appeared to still be an attractive woman. But Sarah decided not to say anything to her daughter about the fact that she was going to come to the evening. Let it be a surprise. She decided to tell her only the night before. Don't you think that's a bit much? You don't think it's a bit much? Jill, owner of the Milady School of Etiquette, wiggled her foot in a dainty slipper and looked over the cost estimates for the evening. Appetizers and desserts from a high-end restaurant, live music, a sea of flowers. I'm in, said Ned, one of the sponsors. I remember you didn't go after your teachers before. Let's be honest, said Patty, Jill's friend and part-time certified rhetoric teacher and speech therapist. Peggy lionized her students every time they confused put on with put on or made other speech errors. This is not just about a teacher, but a man who did much to preserve the tradition of aristocracy in France and Hungary. I think Angelique has her own etiquette schools there, don't you? And a boarding school for girls in Toulouse, Jill reminded herself. And since she, so to speak, decided to honor us with her attention and donate a tidy sum at the same time, why not go along with it? Yeah, we were planning on doing a period piece, Jane Austen's World and all that. But Hungary would be interesting too. The main thing is to make sure there are no incidents. Do you understand me? Jill looked sternly at her companions. No alcohol at my party, not even liquor in the candy, okay? Speaking of occasions, Patty said, I'm worried about this Lily girl. She's a girl with potential, but she's so boyish and stubborn. I don't think she's going to throw anything away. If all the girls were all model light bulbs, the world would be a dull place. Ned grinned. My Joe's got his eye on her, by the way. That's when it was revealed to her shocking, magnificent madness, reducing, however, that she was not just the heiress of the Hungarian aristocracy on the distant branch through some shameful bastards, but the very real reincarnation of the magnificent countess of her mother. And that's when she realized that everything that had gone before didn't matter. What did it matter that her ancestors had gone from middle-class landowners to big industrialists, then lost everything, and then in the middle of the 20th century managed to regain their wealth? What did it matter that branches of her family faded away one by one, because the bonds of family meant nothing to them anymore, and they scattered around the world? What does it matter that she herself was born of an ancestral noble father and some cabaret singer, whom she never thought of as her mother, and who apparently didn't think of her as a relative either, because she spent her entire childhood locked up in a private boarding house in Switzerland, where the power of graceful manners and a good education were believed in above all else. This was reinforced by the strictest discipline and corporal punishment. None of this mattered. The past literally didn't matter to her since she found out who she really was. And then she realized what her purpose was, and the pain, the loneliness, the feeling that no one loved her, it stopped mattering. Angelica realized she, that is, the magnificent Jenny, must have a second life through her. But not the boring, ordinary one that people get married, have babies, do petty things, play silly games like love for family and other people. No, it's all unworthy, because her destiny is to discover the secret of eternal life, eternal beauty, and youth. Jenny failed to achieve this in her time because she was too weak. Poor thing. But she would have the strength and spirit to finish what her magnificent predecessor had begun. Angelica grinned. The firm responsible for preserving and growing her family's fortune, once out of savings that belonged to her, was now horrified when years ago she had started spending fabulous sums of money on historical research. But what did money matter if eternal youth and beauty were at stake? She had seen, touched with her own hands, the rarest grimoires, books of witchcraft bought at auctions and sometimes stolen from private collectors, and how many of them turned out to be utter nonsense. But there were some worthwhile copies, from which she had gleaned the sorcerer's knowledge she needed, bit by bit. And then she tried it the same way Jenny had once experienced it. And how magical it had turned out to be she saw in the mirror as her skin glowed with youth, and those around her complimented her, joking, of course, that she wore makeup so skillfully. Fools, had they known the true recipes. But they weren't all worthy of it. No one was worthy of it but her alone. And then came the dreams in which she saw herself from the outside. And there she was, her Jenny. She saw the dark corridors of the castle and its courtyard lit by torches. She saw, bowed before her maids, silly long maidens who were born only to give her their youth and beauty one day when their time came. And then she realized that it was more complicated than she had thought. First, she realized that she didn't want some leftover chicks, like the homeless or picked up by her faithful men on the highway. She wanted something pure and unadulterated. So she found a man. He was in a trade that was as old as time. He sold slaves. She told him that the price didn't matter, but she needed young girls who would be well brought up, because she needed maids. He was amazed and said that he had had different buyers for the goods, but this was the first time he had bought maidens for such a purpose. She rewarded him lavishly for many years and sometimes visited him to look at the goods. And those divas who came to her liking and who were submissive enough became her maids. Angelique never ceased to marvel at how much there was to be gained in this world if you have a lot of money. These girls were brought to her estate in the south of France, where she for a few days as if reincarnated in the one who was born originally in a previous life, in Jenny. She wore clothes after the fashion of those years, ate dishes of that century, slept on a bed. Unfortunately, people were unreliable after all. She was afraid that the betrayal, as with her predecessor, would be repeated, initiated literally two people in her affairs, her cousin, who once pulled out of a home for the mentally ill, and a young man who was passionately in love with her, or he was in love with her money. However, she didn't care about his true feelings either, because he was just her pawn. And these two of her faithful men kept watch to keep the bad girls from running away, and helped to do with them all the things her predecessor had once done. This went on for a long time, and it seemed to her that the aging had stopped. And then there was one girl among the living goods. She had been kidnapped very young, it seemed, Angelica was delighted every time she saw her because the girl was good, and every time she thought maybe she should take her. Her vitality, the unruly gleam in her eyes. How glorious it would be to get another bit of youthful beauty and another drop of elixir from her. You did it out of pain and fear, but something seemed to be knocking at her brain from within. And each time she decided to wait a little longer, but then it all came crashing down overnight. And just the day before she was supposed to arrive and finally pick up the maid named Sarah, she was informed that it was all over. The police had found the place, and her faithful servant, the one who caught the girls, was dead. That's when Angelica realized she had to lay low. There was too much the detectives couldn't keep up with. How awful it was to be without what she needed, but fear of exposure kept her hiding. She hadn't repeated her rituals in over a decade, and of course, black magic didn't tolerate such neglect. Time resumed its inexorable march, and she began to age. Wrinkles, gray hair. She looked at herself in the mirror with horror, realizing that this was the way to die, to turn into a dry, disgusting old woman. Angelica once again felt lost and alone. Her sister had died of a heart attack, and there was no faithful assistant who would listen to her stories about dreams with such burning eyes. And that boy was a man now. He was clearly beginning to grow weary of her company and demanded money for his silence. She'd give him whatever he wanted. After all, money is nothing compared to eternal youth. And then the idiot got involved in some sordid story and was now in jail. And though Angelica was doing her best to get him out, it was too serious. In the meantime, he was angry and threatened that if she didn't get him out, he would tell the authorities a lot of interesting things about her, and then she would feel bad. Angelica was nervous and didn't know what to do. She even tried to put a spoil on this idiot using knowledge from books. And his father doesn't mind? Jill gasped. Why should my brother mind? Ned raised an eyebrow. We had grandfathers who were peasants ourselves, but they built a business, made capital. So what? Does that make us special people? Let him marry a cleaning lady in his own time. As long as Joe's happy. Now, there's more business to discuss before I go home. What's a man like that in such a hurry? And where is he going? Pretending to be flirtatious and obviously in jest, Petty asked. Sheep had married a long time and was happily married. Or are you in a hurry for a date? No, but I have to walk Tarzan. I try trusting others to do it, but he freaks out. And then I have to walk him myself anyway. Okay, Jill sighed. Let's hope the evening goes so that we all remember it for a long time. Ned went outside and decided not to go straight to the parking lot to get his car, but to walk a little because the weather that evening was just fine, easily thrown, and without any special connotation. The question about his personal life suddenly came to a head. In his 45 years, Ned had never yet been married. He had had relationships, even long-lasting ones, but he couldn't, honestly admitting to himself, call them serious. Yes, those women were beautiful and intelligent. Many even held the title of Miss some kind of pageant. There were model aspiring singers among them and even one ballerina. But with none of them in the relationship, there was no spark of that special feeling that would allow him to make a final decision. With her, he wants to start a family. Ned was white with envy of his brother. He'd been lucky enough to meet the woman he'd chosen while he was still at university. And now they are finally ripe for a son and almost raised a boy so good. And what about him? He, like his brother, runs a business. They have a joint business. There is prosperity in full measure and all the trappings of a beautiful, successful life. But once it seemed, now a whole eternity ago, Ned thought that I should only earn money and the rest in life will come. But now he thought differently and with a bitter chuckle recognized that in the folk wisdom that money can't buy happiness, there is some truth. Still, Ned was not discouraged. He believed that one day, and he wanted to believe that not when he retired, but sooner, he would meet the very woman who could fill the void in his heart and become the one with whom he would find true happiness. And while there were possibilities, Ned was not going to dash everywhere and anywhere in search of her. He hoped that all will be decided by fate itself and happy chance. Strolling along Central City Avenue, Ned's thoughts turned at some point to a different and much less pleasant topic, the upcoming evening at the etiquette school. No, the evening itself didn't embarrass him, but he didn't like this mysterious new sponsor named Angelica. No, It was fine from the outside, efficient for her age, though a little too young, a lady, well-mannered and well-groomed. She had a sense of breed in her. But something was wrong here, and Ned couldn't understand where he was getting this sense of danger in her presence. What was wrong with her? And he also had this strange association that this Angelique was mysterious, like a beautiful, bright, and seductive fruit. It's fine on the outside, and you can reach out and wish you could eat it. And you would. But what gets in the way is that you know the fruit is poisonous. I think I'm gonna take a vacation. I'm going crazy, Ned sighed. Finally, he turned back. He went into the parking lot. At the same time, on the opposite end of town, a woman dressed only in a languid floor-length silk robe was sitting in a luxurious hotel room. She had just taken a bath saturated with rose oil and herbal extracts and was now diligently scrubbing with her fingertips a special face cream prepared according to a unique recipe with her own hands. And she, sitting in front of the makeup table with 3 mirrors, scrutinized her reflection. The lights were off in the room, but it was not dark. Candles were placed everywhere. Yes, it was forbidden by hotel rules, but she didn't care. She wanted to give a damn. Rules didn't exist for people like her, and she'd lived her whole life by the actual written rules, which in many ways, by the way, repeated those by which her great predecessor had once lived and ruled her domain. Though what predecessor? They were one and the same. Angelica had learned this many years ago when she visited the office of an elite blogger who put her into a special trance through hypnosis, thus helping her to immerse herself in the memories of past lives of previous incarnations. Angelica was nervous and didn't know what to do. She even tried to put a spoil on this idiot using knowledge from books, but it didn't work. And then she realized what her mistake was. She'd made that mistake years ago when she missed out on 2 girls. The first one was English and she found her quickly, but it was impossible to get to her easily, even with connections, Angelica, because she became the wife of a very wealthy man. And Angelique decided to save her for later. And first she decided to deal with the first girl. She hired a private detective. And this idiot, of course, had no idea of her true goals, and he found the information she needed. Angelica rejoiced. That girl, also bearing the name Sarah, led the grayest life, unremarkable. Angelica even doubted whether it would do any good as she took away the color of life from the one who had already begun to try. But then the detective said something that shocked her. This Sarah, it turned out, had a daughter who was now just blossoming into a young flower. And then the dreams came back to them. Angelica was her Jenny again, and at the same time saw herself as if from the outside, kneeling and for some reason in a maid's dress before a powerful mistress. Such double dreams always made her wake up in tears and horror, but she realized what she had to do. And that was what she had come here to do. She used what she knew best to teach good manners, how easy it was to bribe stupid people with flattery. Yes, generous donations. At first, Angelica thought she'd have to do it all herself. After all, she had no one left to help her. She thought that she would have to somehow, as if by chance, get acquainted with this girl, become her friend, to then lure her closer. But then she suddenly learned that her daughter Sarah had enrolled in Melody's etiquette school, and she realized that this was a sign of a gift from fate. The task had become simpler and yet more complicated, because now, opening one of the black books of witchcraft, Angelica suddenly began to see on its pages what was not there before. And in her head, not only in her dreams, but now in the middle of the day, the voice of her mother sounded more and more often, saying how proud she was of her heiress and that she had to make them merge, become one. And Angelica finally got what she wanted more than anything else in the world. And now, sitting in front of the mirror in the hotel, Angelica no longer saw a 63-year-old woman in the mirror. Oh no, she saw before her a blossoming Hungarian beauty with lips as scarlet as cherries, skin as white as snow and hair as black as a crow's wing. And admiring herself, she smiled and laughed quietly. For everything was already foretold, everything was going to happen. Finally, it was already tomorrow when the costume party was to take place. Too bad, Angelica thought, that no one would witness her triumph, wouldn't survive the night, but then she would have a new life, as a Hungarian countess deserves. Mom, Grandma, and I look stupid, Lily exclaimed and stomped her foot in her pretty slipper. Why did I even agree to this? "Don't twist or I'll stab you," Grandma commanded as she secured the pearl-headed bobby pin braid into the girl's hair. Then May took a step back, shook her head. "Good. If you had lived at that time, knights of all lands would have fought for you in tournaments. Look in the mirror yourself." Lily was no longer happy that she had agreed to all this. Clasping her eyes, she went to the mirror, opened her eyes and astonished aghast, because at first she didn't even recognize herself in everyday life. Lily wore skirts and dresses, though rarely, but how she had changed, wearing a scarlet velvet floor-length dress, with a high bodice embroidered with golden flowers and Venetian-style sleeves, through slits that showed the cream and silk of the undershirt. Grandmother insisted on discarding the high lace of the new collar. It was not proper for a young girl to wear such a thing. Instead of it, another piece of jewelry was chosen. Her neck and earrings were beaded with a dozen strings of beads, all the way down to the waist. The jewelry, by the way, was not artificial. Once these beads, according to grandmother, belonged to one handsome Baronitsa from the ancestors of the 19th century. The girl's hair was gathered in an intricate hairstyle according to the fashion of the 16th century and decorated with an antique comb. Lily, at 16, was not used to leaving the house without makeup, and actually she was afraid that she would look faded and boring. But now she found her own face in the reflection unexpectedly beautiful. Mouth as scarlet as Charity's, sentenced Granny, skin as white as Lily, hair as black as a raven's wing. What a beauty! Lily nervously, "That's just class." "I wouldn't say that," May grinned. "But it seems that in your youthful language, that's a very undignified assessment. Come on, it's time to show everyone who the real queen of the evening is." Lily nodded, sighed, noting to herself that wearing a corset was an ordeal. She took a step toward the door to the hall. Her mother stopped. She suddenly and reverently intercepted Sarah's hand. "Thank you for coming tonight. I just can't miss such an important event in my daughter's life," Sarah smiled. "And then it's time for me to get out of my shell and start living an interesting life. And it's also time to say goodbye to my past. Let it all go," she added. The last one was no longer out loud, but to herself. The School of Etiquette Milady owned a part of the building in the center of the city, the premises of which were divided into the offices of the management, accounting different auxiliary rooms, as well as dance and other classes. But costume parties were not held directly on the school grounds. Jill didn't think it was the right atmosphere. For this purpose, the largest banquet hall of the elite restaurant Velvet was rented. And due to the fact that a special event was planned here, not just a banquet, almost all the tables were removed, leaving only a few near the wall their servers called light appetizers and drinks. For them, the guests of the evening could come up on their own, and some of them were distributed by waiters. All in all, not many guests had gathered, students, their relatives, and a couple of journalists. They were going to capture the best moments of the evening for a glamorous magazine. "The girls are amazing," Jill said. "They're great." One of the journalists was a guy with glasses named Tony. "Each of the girls is my personal project. A hint to elegance and femininity, which, alas, are so rare in our world." Everyone means everything. Peggy grinned as she approached her. When the journalist went off to the side to talk to the main sponsors of the school, the Stark brothers. "Where's our little girl? Maybe she changed her mind about coming." "If she did, I wouldn't be upset," Jill said. "I mean, she'll look like it." She didn't have time to finish the bad phrase suggesting that some girls, no matter what they do, will never be the epitome of elegance. Because at that minute the doors opened and the last members of the evening, Lily, accompanied by her family, entered the hall. Jill's eyes widened. My mouth dropped open at the sight. Lily wasn't walking. She swam like a swan with her chin up proudly, the perfect posture and grace of a true aristocrat. All eyes turned to her. Joe at this time fruit cocktail choked and almost took offense. But the biggest shock was experienced by the special guest of this evening's etiquette school, the heiress of a once wealthy but now bankrupt family who had come from France. Angelique could not believe her eyes. She was overwhelmed by a rattling mixture of delight and horror at the same time. She had made it clear to that idiot. All the girls were to dress like peasant girls and maids, and even if they wore embroidered shirts, dresses with cats, floral wreaths. In general, they looked like commoners at a feast. That was within the scope of what was intended. But why did one of them dare to dress like a noble lady? And Angelique saw it clearer than the sun sees in the daytime. She had chosen an outfit after the fashion of that very epoch. It copied in many respects the dress from the painting on which Jenny had been portrayed, and the saucy girl was so good. Angelica did not immediately realize that a muffled groan of anger, disappointment, and resentment at the injustice of fate burst from her throat. How was it possible for this wench to be so young and beautiful? Could such a thing be possible? But most horrifying of all is the realization that she is a carbon copy of Sarah in her youth, a reflection of her. But also Angelica wasn't used to backing down. Her gaze fell on her own hands. The skin was old, dry, wrinkled brushes in dark patches. Where had the power of sorcery gone? She should be shining tonight, and only her after all. Well, smirked Angelica maliciously, she will get hers. And she will accept this challenge of fate with dignity. And she moved through the hall. Lily, Jill flew up to the girl. You're adorable. But for some reason, she lowered her voice. We had an agreement. Girls dress in the same theme. We're a little off topic, May interjected. Why such strict boundaries, and why ordinary people? In the past, at your parties, I remember, everyone played princesses and ladies. Jill wanted to say that this was the wish of their special guest, but she approached them and Jill hurriedly introduced her to Lily. Let me look at you, child, said Angelique in French. She also spoke the English she used with Jill. She grasped Lily's chin and met her gaze, and the girl was taken aback by the familiarity. Charming. Angelica smiled wryly. And who are you? Don't you want to be a maid? Sarah had been standing a little away from her daughter all this time, but she had seen and heard everything. And now it seemed to her that she was floating in weightlessness and at the same time falling into the abyss. In her ears, through the loud sound of her own pulse, she heard a voice and a question. Do you want to be a maid? Almost 20 years had passed, but it was impossible to forget such a thing. The lady who came to the unfortunate prisoner wore a mask, but Sarah remembered her eyes icy and ruthless, and she remembered her voice bored and interested at the same time. And now it was all happening again. The room swirled before her eyes. What's wrong? Just in time, her mother-in-law put her arm around her. It's her, Sarah whispered in a colorless voice. I recognize it. It's her. What are you talking about, sweetheart? May immediately realized that something was wrong with her sister-in-law. Come on, let's go sit down and drink some water. That woman, for 10 years, she's been coming, picking and choosing. It was her. Sarah was close to hysteria. There was a storm raging inside her at the same time, pushing things forward. And she wanted to dissolve, to simply fall asleep, just to avoid contact with the nightmare wanting before her eyes. And that's what she would have done, if only she'd seen Angelica. But the thing was, the monster from her past was now at her daughter's side, reaching for her with its ugly paws. I recognize you, Sarah exclaimed and stepped forward. Get away from my daughter. Don't you touch her, you monster. The focus of attention changed. Oh, said Jill. Is she drunk? No, Peggy said, kind of confused. Call security, and you put that camera away. She hissed at the journalist, who wasn't about to miss a scandalous development. That's the meeting. Angelica smiled, and I thought I had disappeared. Sweet girl, I see that the years have not spared you. You have aged. It happens to everyone. I'm sorry. But I see you've got a daughter, a real beauty. Like you at her age. What's going on? Jill was getting more and more nervous. I have no idea, Peggy said. But our kid's mom has great French. How did you, Sarah, come between the man from her past and her daughter? What do you want? Just to get what's mine, Angelique replied, shrugging her shoulders. And then, just a few moments of time in which barely 2 heartbeats can be marked. But how much they sometimes decide. Lily shrieked as she felt a sharp tug on her arm. And now she was standing with her back to the strange woman with whom her mother had started arguing about something. This strange woman was holding her. She had one arm tightly around her waist and the other had something sharp. Lily slanted her eyes to the large full wall mirror and went cold. The point of a stiletto was at her throat. Her brain threw up information from something. 16th century. The work of a German craftsman. The handle was decorated with a golden branch of crimson and ruby. Such things showed my grandmother a photo album from a foreign exhibition in the museum, which she visited in her youth. Some of the students squealed. The journalist shot off at hysterically fast pace. "Mom!" Sarah fainted and was picked up by a man. "Why are you doing?" Jill screamed. "Angelica, no, look, don't do this." "Oh, you're all idiots," you shouted, the one who thought she was the heiress of the great Countess, famous as the first book series in world history. "Nobody can stop me now. No one understands." As soon as I spilled the first drop. At these words, the hand with the stylus trembled and Lily's whole life flashed before her eyes, as they say. "Time will go backwards for me. You think you're gonna stop me? No. I will gain power and strength beyond your mortal dreams. You will bow before me and become my victims willingly, because it's an honor and the only thing you're good for." Saying all this, Angelica and her captive gradually retreated backwards, step by step. The doors opened. They passed through the corridor into other doors and those closed. Angelica slammed them shut and turned the key in the lock. Lily, taking advantage of the fact that this mad woman was distracted and not holding her so tightly, rushed to her side, grabbing her neck in terror. "No, I think it's just a scratch." "Fool, crazy." Tears were in the girl's eyes. Grandmother from childhood tried to teach in foreign languages, including French, but she was not very good at it. So from Angelica's words, the girl understood a little. "What do you want from me? Do you speak Italian?" English was the most fluent language. "Don't you understand yet?" Angelica switched to a language more understandable to her victim, because she always found a special pleasure in giving them the details before everything was done. And she talked about being Jenny's reincarnation, about how she'd been chasing the great goal for years. And now, thanks to telepathy and communication through the ages, she'd learned from her predecessor that in order to do so, not a single one of her victims should be missed. But since Sarah has grown old, it's best to replace her with a daughter. "But your mother won't get away from me either," Angelica added with a grim chuckle. "I'll teach her a lesson for daring to run away." Lily froze. Her mind was feverishly going over possible developments. How soon the people on the other side of the door would be able to break it down, bring help. They found themselves in some small room filled with tables and chairs. There were some boxes. It was cramped, and running away from a mad woman with a style that was uncomfortable. And besides, in cold fear, Lily noted. Judging by the deft way she held it, the stiletto, the way she twirled it in her hand, she knew how to handle it. And then she realized, that's what Mom was talking about. This scary and completely insane woman had something to do with the nightmare she had experienced years ago. And now fear was joined by rage. And then Lily realized she couldn't just pick up and die here. What was she gonna do? And then she remembered her grandmother's stories, some of the history. And Lily thought about how sometimes to win at some crazy game, you don't have to break its rules, you have to accept them. "So you're a descendant of Jenny," she said, and gave Angelica a careful look. "It's a breed, yes." But she raised a finger. "Unclean. You're a bastard, aren't you?" "How dare you?" "I dare you." Lily raised her chin proudly. "See, does the name mean anything to you?" And she said the name of a distant relative of Jenny's. And then a couple more names and a couple more names. The thing was, Lily had recently reread her grandmother's book again, and she'd always had a great memory for names with dates. And as her mom said, she could be a liar. And so to top it all off, the girl added a couple more names. So smoothly but swiftly, she came to the conclusion that she was the heiress through her father's ancestors, who was more related to Jenny than Angelica. And if this nonsense had been heard by Granny or any other decent historian, he would have trashed it in a minute. But right now, Lily was dealing with a lunatic who'd been wallowing in her nightmarish fantasies for years. "Look at me," Lily exclaimed, and shook the bobby pins out of her hair, letting them fall freely over her face, almost hiding it. "My hair is as black as a raven's wing. My skin is whiter than snow and lilies. My lips are as scarlet as cherries. I'm younger and prettier than you." "You're just a girl," Angelique said, but there was uncertainty in her voice, and her hand was down and trembling. "You can't beat her. It's me." "Really?" Lily laughed, though she wouldn't mind at all if she were rescued right now. But she really didn't want the fuss outside the door, and it appeared to be trying to be broken into to prevent her opponent from listening to her carefully. Prevented her from fooling the crazed maniac. Among other things, there was a mirror tall and large against the wall in this room. It must have been about to be hung in one of the restaurant's rooms for interior decor. The room was gloomy. The ghostly light of the moon was pouring in through the fourth-floor window. And then there were the lights of the city. "Then let's check it out," Lily exclaimed, and first stood at the mirror. She turned her back to Angelica at that moment. A dangerous maneuver, but it was intended to bribe with her supposed fearlessness. Although in reality, Lily was very, very scared. "Look carefully," she said in a special mysterious voice. "Who do you see?" Angelica, still clutching, Stella walked over and stood in front of the mirror as well. She stared into it. She did not avert her gaze. "Look closely," Lily whispered, and now she remembered that there is one curious optical effect. If a person in low light begins to stare at her reflection without looking away, soon she would begin to change, to take on an illusorily frightening appearance. That's what Lily was counting on. Could this ugly, crooked old woman be the beautiful Jenny? She asked with a wicked grin. "You lost, and you lost even then, and you still can't realize it. You're a nobody. She left you a long time ago, back when my mother was free. She chose me. I am the Countess's true beauty. I am her legacy and continuation." Angelica trembled, staring at her reflection, and seemed ready to faint. And now Lily immediately more grabbed her hand suddenly. A tinkle sounded, dropping the stele to the floor. She turned Angelica around to face her. "Look at me, it's me, Jenny, and you're a mistake, a beggar, an ugly old loser," she said, looking into the eyes of the madman. And then Angelica screamed. A long, sorrowful scream escaped her throat, and she sat on the floor, hysterical, scratching her face with her fingernails and tearing out her hair. And that's when the door was finally broken down. And the first person to enter was Lily's mom. Sarah froze for a moment. She saw her tormentor sprawled out, hysterical and defeated now. "Daughter," Sarah threw herself at her child. She simply stepped carelessly over Angelica and enclosed Lily in a tight hug. "It's okay, I'm with you." "Yes, Mom," the girl said, swallowing back tears. "Let's get out of here." She smiled through her tears. "I hate corsets. I can't breathe in them." The events of the following months blended into a motley kaleidoscope for the little family. The scandal of the evening at the School of Etiquette could not be avoided at all, and the journalists savored the details of the case when a mad criminal almost made her victim one of the students. Yes, it became clear to everyone who Angelica really was, because on the eve of that evening there in France, her former assistant, angered by the fact that she did not call him, told the authorities all about her madness in the hope that confessions to ease her fate. Angelique was returned to France to stand trial, but there she was eventually sent to a closed asylum because she finally lost her mind, and now everywhere she sees the vengeful spirit of the Hungarian countess haunting her in order to take revenge. Angelica, by the way, had some relatives staying with her, and they naturally did not want a big scandal, so they contacted Sarah to offer her such an arrangement. She would not talk to the press about anything that had happened recently and a long time ago, and they would provide her with a generous moral indemnity. Sarah, by the way, wanted to refuse, but her mother-in-law insisted, noting that she had already been entitled to moral compensation a long time ago, and it was foolish to refuse money when she still had to take care of herself and her daughter. So several €1,000,000 soon arrived in Sarah's account. The man who picked her up fainting that night turned out to be Ned, and that meeting became everything for him, because he simply fell in love like a boy at first sight. However, Sarah was slow to respond to the signs of attention, but he was persistent, and finally, she agreed to have dinner with him, intending to explain everything to him and finally refuse. But it so happened that she succumbed to his charm and agreed to a second meeting, promising herself that it was only as a friend. And in the end, 3 months later, Ned proposed to her. Lily was also going through a big life change. Joe offered to date her, but as he said, it was important to be friends first, because they had to wait until they finished school and came of age before they could think about romance. And Lily also decided to change her style again. And now she refused piercings and total black color in clothes. She wanted pink shades and something floral. But what no one expected was that the grandmother also decided to organize her personal life, And so when she came to her daughter-in-law and granddaughter and said that she should help her choose a wedding dress, they first thought it was a joke. But May was dead serious. Jack and I are not old people. We've lived a fair and full life. But it goes on, and we want to get a sweeter piece of it, so to speak. We'll get married and go on a wedding trip to Greece. And maybe I'll write another book. The main thing, thoughtfully added Grandma, so that he did not think to become a co-author. Otherwise, we'll be divorced. Sarah thought a lot about what had happened recently and about what had happened long ago and about what awaited her next. And the longer she thought, the more she realized. It was time to finally close one of the doors of her past to make room for a new one to live in. In quiet happiness with the man she loved, to enjoy every day and take care of her daughter, to no longer let the dark money of the past distort the real life that was happening here and now. And she accepted Ned's proposal and even agreed to think that maybe they would one day have a child together.